Welcome to the Swing Trading with Cycles channel. It's January 27, 2023, and we are going to do an update on crude oil and energy stocks. We know Exxon announced that big $75 billion buyback. We'll start on that chart actually as just a representation of energy stocks, and obviously a little idiosyncratic because of the announcement, which, theoretically is bullish. And I think the announcement was actually yesterday, and that's a big green candle yesterday. And then what do we have today? Wham! A huge reversal, right? We break below yesterday's low. And what does that make this? That makes this become a swing high. So that means this is potentially our daily cycle high. Now, because these cycles have run for much longer, it's totally possible that it'll shake this off. Like this last one ran 34 days, for instance, right? Like this one here was 32 days. So they tend to be in the 30-ish day range when it's a bullish cycle. But again, this may be the start of something more sinister, right? And so I think the easiest way to think about that is this thing has rallied for 26 days. Now, it's a question, do we start our little downtrend into a daily cycle low? And if you're new to this channel, definitely check the pinned comment for some background info on Cycles 101, price action, how to identify swing highs, swing lows. That's important background. I won't go into that stuff in detail. I'll assume you're able to see some of that content. And so this is just to help us understand how to contextualize the price action, understand when we should be pressing bets. Like right now, we're getting a little late in the cycle. That's Chevron. If we look at Exxon, which is the other big component in the XLE, and we'll look at the XLE itself as well, of course, Chevron is actually on day 34, right? So yesterday it made a high, and today it's consolidating. It's just an inside day inside the range of yesterday. So we're gonna see which side of this range we break. So yesterday's range was a high of 117.78 and a low of 114.34. So that's the level for Exxon. And so let's just actually go to XLE, and we'll look at all the time frames. So for XLE, and XLE, of course, is the ETF that, has all those names, although it's heavily weighted. Exxon and Chevron, I believe, are the two biggest weights. And it is on day 32. This 31 here just marks the high so far. So the high was yesterday. So they all had kind of topped out yesterday, just like Chevron topped out yesterday. Although for Chevron, it had only been rallying for 26 days versus more like 31 for these other names, as I said. And so now your question is this moving into a longer cycle decline? Again, this last one actually lasted for 53 days. This lasted for 32. If we look at the weekly candle, that's going to give us that's going to be our biggest clue, because you can think about weekly cycles as well as the daily cycles, right? And so you have multiple daily cycles within a weekly cycle, for instance. And so this weekly cycle has been a little difficult to pin down for XLE, actually, because you had this big down week, and then you had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and this is actually literally the 7th week that we've still been inside the range of what happened the week of December 5th. And I say the range because really that's what we talk about that on this channel a lot. Charts are just a tool. They're just a tool to help us analyze what price is doing. Is it trending higher? Is it trending lower? Or is it moving sideways? So in this case, it was trending lower on a sort of local level, but in the grander scheme of things, it was actually just all inside, an existing range. And that's all candles are, right? They're just visual representations of price ranges that, again, allow us to understand if price is trending. And so, my God, you could certainly say this looks like a bear flag. I mean, this creepy crawly for, 7 weeks to try to get outside the range of this, and now look what happens. We poke our head above it, and then we come back down. I have to say that's not a great look, right? And so in terms of cycles, you can think of this as like that was week 21, and this is a new cycle, so week, this would technically be week 1, 2, 3, 4. This would be week 7, right? So you could have a situation where you just had a weekly cycle that topped out on week 7, right? The same way that this previous weekly cycle just topped out on week 18. That would be the sort of bear case. But like more tactically, next week, you're going to want to mine the range that we have for this candle, right? Next week is going to open as an inside candle. It's Friday, so we know not too much more is going to change from this candle. So we're probably going to see, a candle that looks something like next week we're going to see something like that, right? So we're going to be inside this range, and it's going to be a question of which side do we break. So for this ETF, and you can do that for any of these names, pull up a chart. And so the weekly range is 93.15 on the high side and 88.38 on the low. So if we break below 88.38, that's how we know we're starting a downtrend on the weekly. Maybe this was a bear flag after all, and we're kind of breaking down. And that this was week 7, this becomes a swing high. Of course, look for false breakdowns. You can have a situation where it breaks down below the level and then recaptures it. You want to be nimble, and that's why you wait for closes to not get faked out. You want to know your time frame. So that's XLE, and if we look at the monthly chart, we're still green on the month, and we're about to close the month. And so just like we just talked about how the next week's candle is going to be an inside week, this next month's candle, so February's candle, opens next week, right? Like we have February 1st on Wednesday, which happens to be when we have the FOMC meeting. Sure to be fireworks, of course. And so you can imagine we're going to open as an inside candle, the same way I kind of illustrated that for the weekly candle. You're going to have a monthly candle. The February candle is going to open something like that, right? Now, obviously, where it opens doesn't tell you where it's going to close, but that's important to know the sort of setup that we're going to need to get outside of this monthly range, which is 93.15 on the high side, 82.83 on the low side, right? Like, so it's your question, your proverbial, do we... And wait, so and that 82, 83 level, I think might actually be the low for the week as well. You'll see these ranges are going to kind of triangulate. That's the multiple time frame analysis, because it's all the same price action. It's just being analyzed on different time frames, right? So that's XLE. The strongest of the bunch for this in terms of ETFs is definitely OIH. So the way I would, and the weekly cycle is a little tough to pin down. I mean, really, you're starting this new swing low. I can kind of think of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So it's actually kind of the same count as XLE. So this is week 6. So you actually kind of have a false breakdown potential here, right? Like you broke below that, right? Like I talked about. At some point, this was a red candle. We had made a lower low. So that's going to be really interesting. So really needs to get back above, what is that? Well, actually, really, next week's candle is going to need to get above the high from this week, which it doesn't look like we're going to break right now. Not like today, I should say, before we close. That's 332. So that's kind of your go zone. So we still have a little bit of a ways to go because we're here at 326. But I think the general picture, though, is we're late in the daily cycle for all of these. So maybe you have another week more higher. But at the same time, obviously, you saw other daily cycles topped out on like day, 50 maybe even. But like, you just have to know that you're not early in the daily cycle right now. You're, in some cases 30 days in, 32 days in. In this case, this one topped out on day 26 so far. So that's interesting. This has actually started to weaken versus the bunch. It definitely was leading. And it's now day 27. So it's now day 33. So we'll be watching this one. Interesting. Although, again, we have that potential false breakdown, which could be a powerful move, and it's this candle right here. Like you can see, this is the daily version of that weekly false breakdown that we were looking at. When this candle goes above this high, it makes this a swing low, a bullish swing low. So that is OIH. So now we'll go through some individual names. Well, actually, let's go through crude oil itself, and we'll look at Brent. So crude has kind of stalled out here, and we talked about this on previous videos. Definitely take a look for the link in the pinned comment. Look at this. Look at this cluster of wicks, right? Like we're not even able to like sniff 3083, are we? Yeah, 82.60. This high was at 82.44. So like 15 cents lower than this high at 82.60 for day 29, I think it was. So, I mean, it's the kind of situation where it's really just kind of a sloppy range, right? And until proven otherwise, I should say, right? Obviously, we can make a lower low, but we have not been able to make a higher high above 83. I mean, you can see that since we dropped below it in this like decline here, we then tried, like our first attempt to try to get back above that was on November 30th, right? So we haven't been back above that for a couple of months now. So it's been 2 months since price has been able to get to, and that kind of tells you your goal signal. If somehow we're able to kind of break through, you have to imagine price is probably going to come up here and test like the 93 area, right? So that's a nice little upside from that potential breakout. But at the same time, but on the flip side of that, the more likely scenario is that we're moving into a daily cycle low right now. We're on pace to close below the 10-day moving average here. It's day 33. The last daily cycle topped out on day 30. This is day 29, and it's obviously a much lower high. This one, I mean, was so bearish, it topped out on day 9. So it's unlikely that we're going to get another higher high even above this 82.60. Again, we tried today. We went to 82.44. And also notice this is a bearish outside candle, right? Again, I talk about like the outside candles, very powerful pattern. We made a new high. It was green. Then we failed. It's kind of like an airplane stalling out. Just kind of went through the ground, if you will. And obviously, we're now kind of rebounding a little bit. This is turning into a little bit more of a doji. But it's not super exciting. Let's see what happens when we get down to 70, because it's refused to get anywhere closer to 70. Now, what we're going to want to watch for on this decline, actually, very specifically, is do we make another higher low, right? Because that's a higher low, right? We made this low here down at 70. Then we had this little rally that failed, but it failed to even retest this low, right? So now it's going to be a question of like, do we make a low like right here, for instance, right? Like you could imagine a world where we make a low like right there. And that tells you, again, prices like obviously not skyrocketing up, but it's also clearly telling you it doesn't want to go much further down. So important clues to watch for in the next couple weeks. So now we're going to spin through some individual names. We'll go through them pretty quickly. Just understand where the downside might be if, in fact, they're on that path. So Valero, I talk about again. This is just a down day for these names in general, but we've seen this kind of thing before, right? Like, for instance, if I like just you have this big down day, and then you have these two up. We continue higher. This big day, we continue higher. So this is day 32 for this guy. This is a refiner. Let's see. Are we at all-time highs now? I think we are. Yeah, we made it to all-time highs. So we've been talking about that this thing was sniffing out all-time highs, and we got there. Usually when something makes all-time highs, it continues to make all-time highs. That's a pretty bullish signal, although it can feel scary, like it's getting toppy. Now, that said, again, as I said with all names in this character here, we are, later in the daily cycle, so we would expect a daily cycle decline. Maybe this is the beginning of it. We'll have to see. If it's not the beginning of it, we probably don't have that many more days of rally, at the very least, right? And so here, notice that pattern, like that other, I think it was oil itself, or XLE, I think it wasn't able to, like it was one big red candle for the week. Let's just go to that one just to make sure we're tracking. Yeah. So I'll get rid of some of these lines so it is easier to see. That is a gap that's going to probably get filled. Interesting. So you have one big red candle, and then you have this creepy crawly action versus Valero, which you're making clear higher highs every month. I mean, this was a pretty ugly one, hard to stay long. Now, this is not a beautiful every week. This is not a beautiful weekly candle on account of the reversal that we're having today, and so this could spell some trouble. But like relative strength, this name is performing really well, and like in terms of like fundamentals, it should be positioned well. So this is week 1, 2, 3, week 7. So most of these are on week 7. So it's clearly, again, so another way of saying that it's made a higher high. I mean, it's literally made a new all-time high. Is that right? Let's just make sure. That's 150.39. And all-time high was 146. And I mean, just by a hair. So we're definitely going to want to see. I mean, the old high was 146.81. I mean, this is totally arbitrary. But I mean, you'd want to see at least like 15%, something like that. So like you want to see it get to like 165. Not just a marginal all-time high, like a new all-time high. Otherwise, it just becomes just kind of like in this case, I guess it would be kind of like a triple top. I mean, what's the high there? That's the high at 142. So we'll watch this one, and this one has a decent dividend yield too, 2.6%. And obviously monthly is looking bullish. So that thing is making all-time highs. That's good to know about. XOP, similar, again, possibly getting a DCH here, but this one is actually probably the earliest. Right, it's day 16. So interesting. If this were the DCH for this one, I would be pretty bearish. But again, I suspect we're going to get more a bigger move up. These names are people want to own these names now, right? They're under. I think they're still. They appear to still be under owned. If you look at Exxon, I mean, wow, look at that weekly chart, man. Oof. That is. But again, day, what is it, 33? So that weekly chart kind of suggests to me we see another up move, like another at least a few days, right? Because again, this was a 50-day rally, so you could easily see this thing run for another couple weeks even. What is that? Phillips 66. Ooh, and I think that is, let's see. Ooh, wow. That is a nice. That is making, yeah, pretty much making all time. Is that no? Not quite an all time high. So we actually still. I mean, just like Valero. Not that it's the same fundamental picture, but I mean, like the principle. We're probably going to make all time highs on this one. So that's 124. We're down here at 109. So that's actually pretty good upside. I don't know that we get there in this daily cycle per se, though. We talked about OIH already a little bit. ConocoPhillips. So this one is actually beneath a swing high still. We talked about this one kind of underperforming. Yet at the same time, this is a reversal candle here. So next week you'd be looking for something like that. So you'd really just need a break above these levels. Like you need to kind of re-break, like get back above this wick. And you might be in business. I mean, this is going back to all-time highs. Again, it's kind of a similar recurring kind of theme for these, clearly. Now, this is definitely an ominous look, kind of like XLE itself that we talked about, because we're just trying to poke our head above this. But again, if we are able to get above it, that could be just kind of game on. So as always, it's a game of probabilities and understanding what is the upside if you are able to get there. Like that, make that upside break. This is Devon Energy. It's been underperforming, and I think somebody had mentioned in the comments it's potentially because of natural gas exposure. Natural gas has gotten trashed, of course. It's day 16, so it's in a similar position as ConocoPhillips actually. That's on day 16 as well. Is that right? Or maybe it was XOP actually. So that makes sense. Marathon Oil, ooh. That is, I wonder if that got caught up in that glitch that happened earlier this week. Might have. Yeah, I think those are all the names on the list. We looked at Chevron already. It's really developing a doji of a monthly candle, so that means odds are we open, pretty much certainly February is going to be an inside month. We'll need to get outside of the range. So the high of 187.81 and a low of 170.85. Before we close out, we'll also just look at Brent to make sure we see the levels on that. It's the same price action as I always say, just different levels. So for Brent, there's a clear ceiling. The ceiling for Brent is above right around 88. So you can call, like, crude oil's 83 is Brent's 88 area. Call it 88 to 89 in that zone. I mean, you see all these wicks, right? You can see that. It's very clear. In the case of crude, it's made more touches to that. Like, it's gotten closer to that range. So it almost feels like Brent is a little weaker in some sense. But that is the picture for crude oil and energy stocks. Thanks for watching.